guys, hope y'all are doing well. We are continuing in our discussion on Jonah, and today I want to look at Psalms chapter 139 verse 7. It says, "Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence?" As I've considered Jonah's flight to Tarshish, it occurred to me that he could have used simpler ways to avoid Nineveh. For instance, he could have chosen to simply stay where he was, remaining in his home in Israel with his native people, and that would have been an easier way to stand clear of the Assyrian nation. Most disobedience involves just that, a simple choice to stay put. Jonah also could have chosen to flee in a less extravagant way. Other cities would have been much easier and far less costly destination. While both of these options would have been equally disobedient, they would have required a lot less effort than paying a fare to go all the way to Tarshish. If he did charter the entire boat, the expense was steep. Whatever the exact circumstance, you can know it cost Jonah a lot of time, energy, effort, and resources to go to Tarshish. See, Jonah was not merely running from some place. He was trying to run from someone. He wanted to put distance between himself and the one with the ticket to Nineveh. Yet Jonah was no newbie. He knew the workings of the Lord. He knew God could not escape. That's religion 101. And Jonah was one of the rare breed of men called to be a prophet. Fewer than 50 prophets existed in Israel from the time of Moses to Malachi. These men were chosen for their sensitivity to God. Jonah must have been an impressive man, steeped in wisdom and insight, walking closely with our Lord. Jonah knew the truth about God. He knew running from God was futile. God is everywhere at the same time, no less in one location than another. All of God is where you are, every moment, every day. So why did Jonah even bother to run? In Jonah chapter 1 verse 3, the original Hebrew phrase, "from the presence of the Lord," is the word Melphine. I'm probably not saying that right. It's Milliphne. This word was used when a person came out of an official audience with the king. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 46, this is the same word used in referring to Joseph as he went out from the presence of Pharaoh into the entire land of Egypt. The implication is that Jonah was not simply running from the Lord. He would have known this to be an impossibility. He was trying to stand clear of having a one-on-one, face-to-face encounter with God. Jonah wanted to put distance between himself and the place where God's presence rested with his people. In other words, he didn't want to sense God's nearness. He didn't want to hear his voice or have an awareness of his presence. In 1 Kings chapter 8, it gives us further insight. It tells of the dedication of the temple. God made special promises regarding his presence and the temple. See, Jerusalem was the epicenter of Jewish life for many reasons. It served as the hub of economic and special needs. It was also a place where God's presence rested. It was this presence from which Jonah wanted to run. The omnipresence of God is wondrous. While He is ever present, He reveals Himself more fully and tangibly in certain times and places. For example, 2 Kings chapter 17, a time when Israel turned from God, sinned against Him, and rebelled without concern for the one who had freed them from Egypt. This phrase basically means that they were deported from the palace where God's presence was granted and experienced. When taken into exile by their enemies, they were certainly still recipients of the omnipresence of God, and yet had been removed from the place where God's manifest presence was on display. This is what Jonah was running from. He wanted to put distance between himself and God's manifest presence. Hearing the voice of God and the sense of a nearness to His presence was certainly too convicting. When we flee from God's presence, we do a most unusual thing. We put ourselves in a very spot of punishment. We find the people who are most subject to bad consequences, and we join them in their negative results. Knowledge of God's nearness can be most comforting to anyone seeking an intimate relationship with Him. And yet it can be the most burdensome reminder for the one who is seeking to avoid the direction and correction of God. Jonah wanted to separate himself from the promised land where he knew the voice of God would be. God's continuous presence is a soothing balm to the hurting. His presence is also a scorching fire to those living in disobedience. One of the ways that we can determine whether we are in the right relationship with Him is to consider the way we feel about His closeness to us. Do we welcome it, or are we trying to stand clear of it? Jonah was involved in ministry as a prophet to Israel, and yet, when divinely interrupted, chose to run from God's manifest presence. He claimed loyalty to God, yet desired no intimate relationship with Him. Are you, in any way, doing good things while at the same time avoiding a close, intimate relationship with the Lord? That gives us something to think about. Are we too wrapped up in the things that we're doing that we don't have that intimate one-on-one time with God each day? See, Jonah knew a thing or two about the downward spiral of disobedience. According to Jonah chapter 1, verse 3, it began with running from God. The descent down a slippery slope culminated in chapter 2 at the bottom of the sea. When he first started running, Jonah, in essence, stepped down from his prophetic office and went down to Joppa, geographically downhill. He found a ship and went down to it. His descent didn't stop there. Once on board, he went down into the hole to get some sleep, and that's in chapter 1, verse 5. Do you see a pattern here? His decision to run from God's command and to escape God's manifest presence spun a web of disaster from which he couldn't get free. Before he knew it, the circumstances gained momentum and took on a life of its own. King David is one of the most phenomenal characters in the Bible. From his childhood until his death, his story has captivated the attention of millions, inspiring them to live bravely and boldly for God. Yet this man had no clean record. If anyone knows how a few bad decisions can make a huge mess to clean up, it's David. His downhill descent began in 2 Samuel chapter 11. It was springtime and he was the king of Israel. While other kings went out to war, David chose to stay home in Jerusalem. I don't know why he stayed home or what had happened to get him out of bed that fateful night, but he threw the covers back and decided to get some fresh air on his rooftop. And that's when he saw her. She was gorgeous. David could have gone back to his room and tried to clear his head, but he didn't. David's deception ran deep and resulted in a pregnancy and a murder. I wonder how stunned David was when he considered the recent events of his life. Did he wonder how things had gotten so out of control? We see another illustration of bad choices running rampant in a person's life in the story of the prodigal son. And we find that in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. In this stunning picture of a father and his beloved children, we meet a son who willingly chose to take the good gifts that he had been given and leave the safety of his home and the love of his father. Like Jonah, he set his sights on a distant country and lived rebelliously. It was not until his downward tumble gained steam and he found himself desiring the slop that he was giving some pigs, then it occurred to him how far he had exactly fallen. The point to this lesson today is that the decisions that you are making today will impact your tomorrows. How you choose to respond to God's leading right now will determine how your future unfolds. Every David will end up in a web of deception, and every prodigal will find himself in a pigsty, and every Jonah will look up to see his storm clouds gathering. It's only a matter of time. What is God asking of you today? Are you responding with willingness or by running for Joppa and looking for the boat to get away from God's will? Don't head down, look up. God's best for you is on the horizon. If you have made bad choices and found yourself in a descent that has led you places that you never thought you'd go, today is a good day to begin the upward climb. As you saw from the example, sin has consequences. And yet while God is a God of justice, He is also compassionate. So look up. When you do, you'll see the eyes of a merciful Father looking back with open arms to gather you back to Himself. The Lord longs to be gracious to you, and therefore He waits on high to have compassion on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. How blessed are those who long for Him. And that's Isaiah chapter 30, verse 18. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you all are enjoying these. As always, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Like, share, and subscribe. Nobody sees the videos unless you share them, so share them. And if you've not subscribed, please subscribe. I love you guys. And if you want me to continue in Jonah, leave me a comment. Just a thumbs up, or just say yes, please continue. Or no, don't. So just let me know. And if there's anyone else that you would like to study in the Bible, leave it in the comments. And that's all I have. And if I don't see you in the next video, I hope to see you in heaven. Bye, guys.